Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our webinar here in London on Wednesday, the 12th of June, 2024. And I can see that the large numbers of registrations have already arrived. Welcome to you all. Thank you for logging in and for registering today. And our webinar today is called Enjoying or Exploring a Fresh Approach to Golden Visa Investment in Portugal. I'm Christina Hipsley from the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. A lot of you will know me already. And we organise the Moving to Portugal show and seminars every year here in the UK and Ireland. And our next live show is actually in central London on Thursday, the 17th of October. If you'd like to come along, please go to movingtoportugal.org.uk. And you can register to attend the free event. It's an all-day event. And many of today's presenters will be with us on the 17th of October. So come and meet them. Now, just to give you a very quick overview before we start our first presentation, this webinar will be around 50 minutes long, about 40 minutes of slides from our speakers, and then we take questions at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A box below, and we will answer them at the end. And we also wanted to let you know that we'll give you all a link to the presentations after the webinar finishes, and we will be uploading the webinar onto our YouTube channel as soon as the webinar is over, well, around an hour afterwards for technical reasons. Now, the reason you're all here with us today is the aim of today's webinar is to explain the latest updates to the Golden Visa Programme in Portugal. Golden Visa Programme is also known as the Residency by Investment Programme. And we'll also be covering an innovative new private equity fund, which does offer a fresh approach for those of you interested in the Golden Visa option, because it has an interesting way of approaching the Golden Visa investment, which we will tell you about. Now, I'm just going to very briefly tell you a little bit about each of our four presenters, and then we're going to start off with our first set of slides. So, next slide, please. The first presenter that we will be inviting to talk to us is Mark Penney from SunCap Visa, and he will give us an overview of Portugal's current visa options, i.e. the difference between the visas you can apply for if you want to live permanently in Portugal, i.e. over 183 days a year, or the visa that you want to apply for if you want flexibility and you don't want to spend many days a year in Portugal, i.e. the golden visas. Now, so we'll come to Mark Penney in a minute. Next slide, please. After Mark, we'll be hearing from James Quarmby from Stephenson, Harwood. Now, James is a specialist tax lawyer, and he's going to talk about the potential impact of higher taxes and the changes to non-dom status under a potential Labour government. As we all know, we've got the British general election on the 4th of July, and the manifestos of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are being circulated this week. So James is being busy reading, working out what might happen. Next slide, please. After James, we're going to be hearing from Tomás Assis Teixeira. He is from CCA law firm, big law firm in Lisbon. And the fact is that higher taxes under Labour and the coming changes to the non-dom status here in the UK, they may make you feel like moving to Portugal. Let's be fair, that's why you're here. So Tomás is going to talk to us in some detail about the tax benefits for permanent residents in Portugal, i.e. if you move to Portugal and want to live there, then you might be interested in the non-habitual tax regime. And he will also tell us more about the Golden Visa Programme and the detail of how that visa works as well. Next slide, please. And our final presenter is our friend Marta Dessa Leal from Arish Capital Partners. Now, Arish have a very innovative fund which is recently launched called the Revolution Fund. And she's going to talk you through why this is a particularly attractive option. It's got some very new features and well worth listening. So this is if you wish to apply for a golden visa in Portugal under the investment criteria, i.e. you invest 500,000 euros in a private equity fund in Portugal. Right, without further ado, any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I'd like to move to the next slide and invite our first presenter, Mark Penney, to just talk us briefly through his slides. Mark.
Thanks very much, Christina, and thanks everybody for coming on the webinar this afternoon. I'm Mark Penney. I'm a director of SunCap Visa. For 35 years, I was a financial advisor, and I advised many high net worth families and individuals on their affairs. I came into advising people about golden visas and visa structures some 3 years ago, and I have a reasonable understanding now of what happens for individuals and helping them on their journey. Next slide. SunCap tried to provide a holistic approach to planning your requirements. The boutique offers we have, we'll examine lots of different visa structures, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. But in essence, I listen to what you are looking to achieve, and I try to work with you to fulfill your requirements. Next. The changing face of immigration. We know Portugal is becoming a very popular place for people to move to. But at the same time as this is happening, the EU are very conscious of the golden visa proposition. Recently, we saw the cancellation of the Vanuatu citizenship by investment program. Literally, that was only done last week. So the EU is very, very conscious of what the program offers and the potential abuses of these programs. Recently, we saw Spain and certainly we saw Portugal cancel their residential property golden visa, and Spain is now on the verge of doing that. We're also seeing rises in the cost of a golden visa, and Greece in particular at the end of this year, theirs will rise from 400,000 to 800,000. The final factor to note in all of this is the digitalization of your passport and how governments will monitor your movements. The digital records they have, they can hold them for up to 3 years. So if you do abuse your stay requirements, then fines could be levied and expulsions from that territory. Next. What we do know, though, is Portugal is very, very popular for the Brits. Over 43,000 people now call Portugal home. British people call Portugal home. And last year we saw record numbers in terms of applications, some 3,200. Portugal will always be popular for the Brits. We're entering a period where it's the centenary, 50-year anniversary of Quinta do Lago. So the Algarve has become a very popular place for Brits. But now what we're seeing is Lisbon and Porto opening up, and more people considering these as a second destination for home. Next. James is going to touch briefly on the whole changes that are about to impact the UK citizens in terms of tax. But the most important thing I find when I talk to people is they preserve their wealth and they want to avoid large tax bills in the future. So the NHR program, albeit it has changed, still offers some opportunities for investors. Most other people want to have that EU citizenship. You know, Brexit caused a lot of problems and a lot of people still want to be part of the EU. There is an interim tax program called Regressa, and Tom Ash will touch on this, but it offers those people who are interested in taking up the golden visa structures now a way of reducing their tax liability on an ongoing basis. Next. I mentioned obviously there's different visa solutions. I'm not going to go into great detail about each one, but suffice to say the D range of visas are those that people would need to spend at least 183 days in Portugal in residence. The golden visa doesn't require that. And essentially there are two types, the art and cultural heritage visa. To date, we haven't seen anything come of that yet. And then we have the venture capital fund route, which is the most popular route that people have elected to go down. Next. So if we look briefly at the Golden Visa, the attractions of it, it's different to other programs because the Portuguese program is an investment in a fund. It's not buying a passport. The efficient way, in the sense that you buy the Golden Visa, you only have to spend 7 days per year for a 5-year period. And the EU passport is granted after 5 years. Recently, we've seen changes with regards to the legislation, and no longer do you have to wait until your interview, but it relates to the submission of your application. You can bring other family members too, your spouse or legal partner if they've lived with you for 2 years, children under the age of 18 or those who are dependent upon you in full-time education up to the age of 26, and parents over the age of 66 if they are financially dependent upon you. Next. So we know Portugal's open for business. The new government is committed to keeping the Golden Visa program, and there are going to be further iterations of that in the coming years. Portugal's a growing economy. Since 2010, it's been well ahead of many of its European counterparts. We have a high population that speaks English. There are no inheritance tax. There's no capital gains tax on your main residence, no wealth tax, the free education system, the free medical system, the lower cost of living. If you have a net income of €2,500 a month, you can live like a king. And the weather. Next. One question that people frequently ask me is, can I buy a property in Portugal? And if so, what might that look like? So most of the banks will offer mortgages. Normally it's 70% loan to value, subject to income. And I work with an exclusive mortgage broker. He doesn't provide life insurance and sell other products. He solely focuses on mortgages. And here's an example of some of the rates that are on offer at this moment in time. What we would give for some of those rates. The UK rate at the moment, if you look at that 20-year term, 3.3% per annum fixed. So property purchase is very much manageable in Portugal. Next. That's me. You can reach me on any one of those numbers, or you can book a meeting on HubSpot. So I'd be happy to talk with you or answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was most helpful. And we'll give your full contact details again right at the end when we're doing the Q&As. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, all our participants watching hard? It's wonderful to have you with us. And just put any questions you've got in the Q&A box. Now, our next speaker, we're delighted to welcome to our webinar today, James Quarmby, who's the specialist tax lawyer and, as you can see, the head of the Stephenson Harwood Private Wealth Management section. Now, James, I will assume all our readers and listeners are reading this as well. So if I could just ask you to, we'll move to the next slide, and we would love you to start telling us what we should be looking out for in terms of specialist tax advice over the coming weeks. Next slide, please. Welcome, James. Over to you.
Thank you, Christina. Mark, you had me on the 300 days of sunshine. In the last 12 months, I feel we've had 3 days of sunshine in the UK. Frankly, I'm sick of it. We've got an election. You may have noticed we have an election. It all seems a foregone conclusion, which is why no one's got terribly excited about it. But what I have been doing is reading the manifestos so that you don't have to. Next slide. Just a bit about my firm. We're an international law firm. We're in those locations: London, France, Greece, Dubai, and China, Singapore. So we're well used to international clients. The world has become more mobile, and this is something that is going to be relevant to what I'm talking about on tax. The mobility of wealth is a huge issue for governments now. Next slide, please. He should be looking pleased with himself, because he'll probably be our Prime Minister in a few short weeks. And a lot of people are getting quite stressed about what that may mean for themselves and their wealth. So let's have a look at what they're going to do. And I should say, by the way, that right now we have not seen the manifesto. What we've seen is a load of press comment about what they're going to do, what they're not going to do for tax. I'm going to take you through that. Had this webinar been early next week, we'd have the manifesto in front of us. So let's see on the next slide what they're going to, firstly, what they're not going to do. Labour's pursuing a safety first approach to this election. They've reckoned that provided they don't do anything stupid between now and election day, they will win. And I think the manifesto will reflect that. It will not have anything stupid in it. If you want to compare it to the Corbyn manifesto back in 2019, which I dubbed the second longest suicide note in history, it scared everyone to death, especially the bit in the manifesto where they said they were going to effectively snaffle 10% of the shares of all the big companies in the UK. It's extraordinary that found its way into a manifesto. Labour has learnt from its mistakes in the past of producing scary manifestos. So it will be boring. They've already told us what they won't do. They will not increase income tax rates. I have to stress the word rate in that sentence. There are other ways of increasing income tax without mucking around with the rates, and that includes bringing down thresholds. Now, if you live in Scotland, firstly, you have my sympathies, because you've got the Scottish National Party who brought all the rates down. So the top rate of 45% is payable at around about £80,000 of income, whereas in the rest of the UK, it's 125. So that means a massive amount of extra tax if you are caught. Labour said it will not increase VAT or NIC or corporation tax. In fact, it even suggests it might want to bring them down. And it said no wealth tax, although I don't believe that. What I mean by that is I'm expecting a reform of property tax, and property tax is another form of wealth tax. We've not had a revaluation of the rating in the UK since about early 1990s. So it's long overdue. Anyway, let's see the next slide. What will they do? Well, they keep going on and on and on about the non-doms. I'm sick of hearing it. They think that by abolishing the system, they'll bring in 3 billion. My own calculations, and I like to think I know more than they do about the topic, is that I think it will lose the Treasury about 4 billion a year if they carry out all of their threats. So having said that, I think once they're in government, they will actually have access to some intelligent grown-ups who will explain to them that if they enact their plans as published, then it will lose them money. But as I said, we've not seen the manifesto yet. I'm expecting a bland statement in the manifesto to say we're going to abolish the non-dom system. VAT and school fees, that's been done to death if you buy any newspaper. So I'm not going to talk any more about that. The carried interest loophole, you either know what that is or you don't. I don't have time to explain it. Crackdown on tax avoidance. Every government in my adult lifetime has said they're going to crack down on tax avoidance. This new government will be no different. Not sure how successful they will be. There's not much flex left in the system, to be honest. And there's some other unspecified stuff. So what does this all mean? Let's look at the next slide. So this is manifesto territory. It's campaigning territory. It does not need to be fully costed. It does not need to be run through the OBR. The Office for Budget Responsibility normally checks every single budget put forward by a government. The one exception is the Liz Truss budget, which sent the whole world into a tailspin and promptly ended her premiership. So Labour can say what it wants in its manifesto, but it won't turn into a budget unless it's been costed. But given that they box themselves in on income tax, NI, VAT, CT, which brings in 75% of our tax revenues, this leaves very little room for manoeuvre. So what is likely to happen? We'll see on the next slide. Well, there's been so much chat about CGT. even Keir Starmer came out and said, well, I don't want to increase CGT, but I might have to. They've not committed to not increasing it. They're not going to say they will increase it, but we all know that they will. IHT, they've got their eyes on. IHT brings in 8 billion at the moment for the government, and they're looking at abolishing some reliefs. Pension tax relief, they were going to reinstate the lifetime allowance when I drafted these slides, but annoyingly, they announced yesterday that they're not going to reinstate them, so the slide is incorrect. I think, though, that's a sideshow, and that there's a good chance they'll abolish the higher rate tax relief on contributions. I've already talked about fiscal drag, which is mucking around with those thresholds. Council taxes revaluation, it's another form of wealth tax, and stamp duty, definitely going to increase the rate for non-residents. The point, I think, that needs to be made just generally in relation to tax, and I know I focused on Labour, I haven't talked about the Greens. There's no point talking about the Greens. They're not going to get into power. The Tory manifesto is almost irrelevant because they're so far behind in the polls, and no one cares what the Liberal Democrats think about anything, so we're not going to talk about that either. I think when we look at the fact it will be a Labour government, they're going to have very little room for manoeuvre. The only choices they've got is to increase taxes or to reduce expenditure. That's very hard for a Labour government that's been complaining about the Conservatives cutting this and cutting that, and the use of the A word, austerity, which has been used so often. So taxes will have to go up. And it goes back to the point I made at the beginning, the mobility of labour, the mobility of capital and people. I think that this is why the Portuguese regime is very interesting. If you don't like the heat in the kitchen, you get out. And I think a lot of people will be examining their own tax profile post-election. And if they don't like it, they'll be looking at options elsewhere. And I think that's something that the Labour Party in government is going to need to think very, very carefully about, because if you increase taxes too high, people will move elsewhere. Let's see what's on the next slide. One part of that discussion on people leaving, the most mobile cohort of taxpayers in the UK are by definition foreigners, because they have chosen to come to the UK in the first place. They are experienced in moving jurisdictions. So if the tax goes up too highly for non-domiciled people, they will leave. And I think what's been interesting is how blatantly some jurisdictions have been pitching for that market. I know, for instance, Mark mentioned the Greek regime. The Greeks are actively courting the non-doms to come over, and I know Monaco's doing the same. I think all jurisdictions will be wanting our wealthy cast-offs, for want of a better word. And that's, again, something that the UK government needs to consider very carefully. The cohort of non-doms in the UK is 68,000, of which about 20% pay nearly all of the tax. You add that all up together, that's about 12.4 billion. If they all decided to get on a plane and not come back, we will lose a lot of money. So I think that's the conundrum we've got for Labour. They need to consider the mobility of individuals and their capital, particularly those with EU passports. And even if you don't, you've got the golden visa regimes. And I think that is something that will be exercised in the minds of our politicians to come. I think, Christina, that's the last slide. Can't remember.
Yeah. We'll find out. Okay, it was the last slide. Well done, James.
Oh my God, that's such a relief. Hope I've kept in the time I was given. I think roughly 10 minutes, and hang around for questions if they need them later on.
Absolutely, James. Thank you very much for that thoughtful summary of what might happen. And I have a feeling you're right. I do think it's very clear that Portugal is an increasingly attractive option for those of us anticipating with worry the coming potential Labour government. So on that note, following up from James's point about why you might want to leave the UK, we've invited our next speaker, next slide please, Tomás Assis Teixeira from CCA law firm, to explain to us why the benefits of Portugal are so great for non-doms or British residents, normal British residents who are thinking of reorganising their tax affairs in light of the possible change of government. So, Tomás, if I could ask you to kick off with your slides and explain the tax benefits of moving to Portugal and a bit more detail about the golden visa options as well. Tomás, over to you. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you all for being here. I see no, but I can read some known faces. So some of you may have heard what I will say. Next slide, please. But I'm here to speak about the Portuguese Golden Visa program, and also about the currently existing tax benefits that Portugal still has until the end of 2024, and eventually after 25, and the advantages of each program. I am a lawyer in Portugal. I am a partner at CCA law firm, which is a full service Portuguese law firm. I will not bother you with my CV. You can check it out online, and if you need, you know where I am. In terms of the Portuguese Golden Visa program, technically it's called the Residency by Investment Program. It's very important that you understand that it's a one of a kind thing in all programs that exist all around Europe. It's a one of a kind thing because it offers you flexibility. It's a one of a kind like no other. You need to spend 7 days a year on average with a Portuguese program to start your path towards Portuguese citizenship. It's a one of a kind thing because it offers this path starts when you apply for the visa, and this path takes 5 years for you to become eligible for becoming a Portuguese citizen, which is something that is quite advantageous, as you know, because you become a European. I will not go there as well because of the Brexit, unfortunately. But the important point is, when considering other types of programs, the Portuguese program does not imply any does not have any tax implications, or better said, negative tax implications. The Portuguese program entitles you to everything that a Portuguese has except voting until you have citizenship, and all of that with the obligation of maintaining an investment, which I will show you what it is after, and also spending 7 days a year in Portugal, which if we go to the Algarve, we basically see that I think that almost every British citizen spends a week at least in the Algarve per year. So probably everyone does that. So with that, you pay your vacation and you get a Portuguese passport 5 years down the road. Next slide, please. And then the main features of the visa. So you do an investment, and then you are entitled to a temporary residency. The cards are valid for 2 years, and then you renew them. So you have to show that you maintain the same criteria that you were granted the visa initially, and with that you are able to renew the visa every 2 years. You get a violent, sustainable route towards EU citizenship, one that is tested, one that is fast, and one that is clean. You get a visa-free travel in the Schengen area. This feature is more relevant for those that have this limitation on their passport. It's not the case of the UK, but probably we have some nationals that have that difficulty, and the golden visa gives you that freedom. You do not need a visa to enter Schengen all the time. That is something very, very tough for several of my clients. It is important to note that with one investment, you can include all your family, your direct family, and this includes your wife or your partner, or your children under 18, your dependent children under 26, if they are dependent and enrolled in a degree. And by the way, if they do not get married during the entire procedure, because marriage means automatic emancipation, so they cannot do that. And in parents over 65, if your parents are over 65, they can also be included, and this also applies to your in-laws. So it's thinking that with one investment, if you have you can bring your entire children. Important to say as well, regarding the age of the children, this dependency under 26 is a presumption. So if we can prove that the dependency, even if it goes beyond 26, if children remain studying, they do a master's, whatever, they can still continue to apply and to be part of the application of their parents. Okay. All of this done, you open a path towards Portuguese citizenship, and this path happens 5 years after you apply for the visa. So 5 years after you apply for the visa, you are entitled to get and apply for Portuguese citizenship. Next slide, please. All of this is achieved through an investment. There are several ways of investing. I will focus, as Mark did before, I will focus on the two main routes. At the end of the day, we only have today we only have one route that people follow, but we have other routes that you can apply. I would focus myself on the transfer of an amount equal or greater to 500,000 euros to invest in Portuguese venture capital funds to capitalize Portuguese companies. The reason for this is obviously the Portuguese government is seeking new ways of capitalizing the Portuguese market in terms of the Portuguese corporate market, and obviously foreign capital is something that a country such as ours really needs. Then you have 250,000 euros that works as a donation, so you basically give a donation and invest in cultural activities or recovery of Portuguese assets and things like that. But that is a lost investment, contrary to the funds that generically provide very good returns. Then you may incorporate the company in Portugal and invest 500,000 euros in that company and create jobs. With that, you are entitled to apply for a golden visa as well. And then the other one is the creation of 10 work posts. None of these, except the funds, the cultural golden visa, as we call it, the 250 threshold, had some success. But nowadays, with the exit and the termination of the real estate as a possible route for golden visa investment, I'm sure that those that are a little versed in the golden visa sector know that in last October, all real estate investment was taken out of the golden visa program, and this is the reason why the funds have gained such attraction in the golden visa environment, and that is why so many people are now investing in these types of organisms of legal schemes to basically capitalize our economy that so much needs capital. Next slide, please. So as I said, for you to get the golden visa, your obligations are: you need to keep the investment during the entire duration that you have your golden visa. You need to spend an average of 7 days per year in Portugal, and you need to keep on renewing your visa. The renewals happen 2 years after you have your visa granted and 4 years after you have your visa granted. It is very important to note, however, that, as I said before, you are entitled to apply for Portuguese citizenship 5 years after you submit for the visa, not when you get the visa, when you submit for the visa. And this was a change in the law that was enacted in the beginning of the year, or more in February, I believe, that wanted to respond to the various delays that the golden visa program had, which meant that the time for nationality was also delayed for a very long time. So what the government wanted to change was, the past law said that the time for nationality counted from the date of issuance of the visa, and then now changed it to the date of submission of the visa. And we believe, on the industry, lawyers, and my fellow colleagues, we all believe that this is a complete game changer for the program, because at the end of the day, 75-80% of people that apply for the Portuguese golden visa program, their objective is to obtain EU residency and Portuguese citizenship as well. Next slide. Okay, we now enter into the NHR tax benefits. I'm sure some of you know about this program. It's a program that basically will end in the end of 24. And there are several, and there is an interim regime that is still applicable, and that will be, and that allows people to still benefit applying until the end of 24, and still have the benefits that we have. So very quickly, the benefits are a special rate of 20% applicable to employment income and professional business income deriving from Portuguese sources that arise from high value added activities. There is a list of activities that can benefit from this. Special rate of 10% applicable to private pensions, and then exemption of foreign sourced income provided that certain conditions are met, but applicable to dividends, royalties, interests, or rental income. And salary obtained abroad may be exempt if taxed in the source at source. So all of these things, basically, you need to comply with certain types of criteria, and those criteria had to be met until the end of 2023. And if you meet those criteria, and I can tell you all about them because they are very specific, individually, if you want, you may still apply for the NHR until the end of the current year of 2024. Next slide. Then there is a new NHR which is still yet to be materialized, but basically it cuts out pensions, but it's still pretty much the same that the other regime was, except it does not have the feature of pensions, and it's not such a broad regime as the other NHR regime was. Still, we are waiting to understand how will this unfold, what will be the list of professions that will be included in this new tax regime, what do they construe as tax incentive for scientific research and innovation, and once we have that, we will be able to give you more detail on this. Another important thing to take into account, and this is something that may or may not happen, is that there may be also NHR programs applicable in certain areas of Portugal. So you may have regions in the country, namely the autonomous regions of Madeira and Azores, having NHR regimes applicable exclusively to them. That will mean that whoever moves to that specific place may be able to benefit from those regimes and from the tax advantages that I highlighted above. And I think it's my last one, Christina. Next slide. Thank you.
Oh, right. Okay. So thank you, Tomasz. Right. So it's clear that there are significant tax benefits to moving to Portugal. And the new government recently installed in Lisbon is reviewing certain of the criteria. So it's very clear. Anybody with serious questions and interest in that should be talking directly to Tomasz afterwards, which will give you his full details. We've got some really good questions.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to add, because on that specific point, just to state, because James touched on some points that may be changed in the UK. In Portugal, we are quite conservative. I mean, so far we never know what will happen, but in Portugal there is no wealth tax, there is no succession tax. It's not for the Portuguese, for those that live here, it's not the friendliest tax regime in the world. But if you can combine an NHR with the fact that there is no wealth tax, there is no succession tax, this makes the option for Portugal even stronger.